that the video was going to be on at 8 p.m. last night on TCM. It was not.
Okay, Commissioner, we're live. Please say welcome back. Something like that.
Welcome back. I hope you can hear me now. This is the final briefing, allegedly, the final briefing on the Civic Center and Courthouse project. And by way of introduction, I'm John Hutchings, Board of County Commissioners Commissioner, and
Ty Menser, Commissioner, District 3.
Gary Edwards, Commissioner.
I'm Robin Campbell, Assistant County Manager.
Romero Chavez, County Manager.
Patrick O'Connor, Director of Public Defense.
Lynn Meyer, Enloe County Clerk.
Rick Thomas, the County Commissioner's Project Manager.
Ron Thomas, President of Thomas Architecture Studios.
Keith Staley, Community Planning Development Director, City of Olympia.
Brett Buckley, Thurston County District Court Judge.
Joe Yavman, County Treasurer.
all right, and I'm going to do the staff here as well, get them involved.
Susan Isham, Central Services.
Megan Porter, Public Information. Vicki Larkin, Commissioner Edwards' office.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here promptly. And entering the room now is Prosecuting Attorney John Thunheim. Please have a seat, sir.
Thank you.
And don't have to introduce yourself now. Are you going to frame this thing then?
Yeah, we'll frame it.
Romero, thank you.
Yeah. So as Commissioner Hutchings explained, this is a follow-up to the December 13 meeting where we had to interrupt the last part of the meeting related to a bomb threat that we received. And so this is a follow-up. What you will see today is a shorter version of that briefing. And just to make sure that at the end, we have the opportunity to have a discussion. And some of you, I'm sure, if you have any questions, clarifying questions, that will be an opportunity to do that as well. So since we are live streaming, I will appreciate if you have any comments at the end. Please pass the microphone around so we can capture your questions and as well as provide the answers within that. So, and at the end, I will outline some of the next steps, and then we'll close the meeting at that time.
All right. So now as for the review of the project,
Yeah.
is that going to go to Ron or go to
So
Rick?
allow me to give you a little bit of a background in
Allow you
history.
anything you wish.
This project, in the intent to replace, remodel, or do something with this facility, has been on and off for many years. Let me take you just back to 2015 when we developed a concept study. In the concept study included a assessment of the space needs and as well as conceptual as to how a particular new courthouse should be put in place, including downtown, up here, and so on and so forth. So since then, it has been a little bit of additional interest, and not necessarily the interest from the stakeholders. It's just the interest of all of us who use the facilities, and as well as the citizens who visit the facilities to conduct business in the county, can attest to the fact that we need to do something with this facility. It's just plain and simple. It does not meet the needs of the space to begin with, and just from the operation point of view, it becomes a real challenge from the courts to the treasurer to the auditor, everyone who conduct business here in the county and the courthouse. It is an issue. It is an issue with parking, and also it is an issue with just the wear and tear. And right now we're spending a lot of money in just trying to maintain and keep up this facility just to a certain level so we can continue on with the business. So I think all of us can agree on the need. So that need translated in 2017 when we hired Rick to help us carry on this duty of taking the next steps. So the next steps in the process were we developed a series of criteria. The Board of County Commissioners at that time approved that criteria, in which we utilized that criteria to narrow down many sites. So we began by having 12 sites at some point, and it was an internal group that we went through, took that criteria, identified, and came down to the 3 sites that we have today. The 3 sites is the existing courthouse, the Plum Street, the old City of Olympia City Hall, and as well as a site on the west side along Kaiser Road. So within the whole process, then the next logical step was to take those 3 sites and hire an expert, Ron Thomas Architects, and just to walk us through as to what the feasibility of those 3 sites will be. So taking it down to a little more in-depth detail. And that's really where we are today in terms of the feasibility study. And leading to the feasibility study, there was a lot of some outreach efforts to the community and everything else, and that will be perhaps part of the presentation. So and the next steps in the process after today, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions, clarifying questions, or any comments that you may have. The intent is for next week, and I already scheduled a meeting on Tuesday, January 15 at 2 in the afternoon for the commissioners to begin the conversation or perhaps the deliberation. They hopefully will lead to selecting 1 site out of the 3. And at this point, that is the milestone. I know that some of you have received a schedule. And the schedule right now is a tentative schedule to have a potential ballot measure at the August, the preliminary primary election in 2019. Within the report, there is also a suggestion that perhaps that can be delayed to the general election, which is in November, and that will also be part of that decision-making process. But again, at this point, the first decision the commissioners need to make is selecting a preferred site. So along the way, and then I'll give the floor to the experts, I'd like to emphasize that we have to be respectful to the process. And the process leading for the commissioners to make a decision, whatever that decision is, in terms of the site, I believe in order for this to be successful, a successful project, all of us, and I see all of us in this room, needs to stay behind that decision. And at that time, we need to develop a consistent message as to how we're going to be explaining that. Because if there's any dissent within that decision point, might as well forget it, because that is going to be a fruitless exercise going to the voters if we don't have a consolidated front and a unified message. So with that, I just leave it there and take it out. Rick?
Thank you, Romero, and thank you, county commissioners. We appreciate the time today. I'm just going to take a moment or two to kind of set the stage before I turn it over to Ron. Want to make it very clear that the study that we had Ron and his team invoke on was a study to give us a comparison between the 3 sites, again, that the commissioners asked us to look at in detail last summer. And what you are going to see as you go through this is an unbiased analysis of each one of the projects. We've tried to lay out the opportunities and the challenges for each one of the sites and do it in a detailed fashion so that as commissioners, you'll hopefully have enough information to be able to make an informed decision. I will tell you right from the beginning, there's no site that's perfect, but all 3 of the sites that we have taken a look at, they definitely are viable. And so I don't envy your position to have to make the final decision. We're just simply here to try to lay out the facts the best way that we can. I will say that, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we did spend a significant amount of time from September through December, not only gathering the details of characteristics of the site and impacts of that site on surrounding areas, but we also did several outreaches throughout the entire county. Went to the west side, we did outreaches in downtown Olympia, in Lacey, we went out to Yelm, to Rainier, to Tenino, and to Rochester, in order to at least to be able to make known what we're working on. We did get a significant amount of feedback during that time, and that information is available in the actual study that's been done. Due to the time constraints really today, and don't say that negatively, but we did get about 2/3 of the way through this one time. We are not going to take any time to go through the public outreach because that was covered at our previous meeting. We really want to focus our attention today on really the details of the sites and make sure that there's that opportunity to answer questions or any comments that might come up today. So with that, Ron, I'm going to turn it to you. And there are handouts for those who may have come in a little bit late. There's handouts on the back. We do have a PowerPoint up here that is basically the same information. It's just in a slightly different format. So with that, Ron, I'll turn it over to you, and we have about 40 minutes or so.
Thank you, Rick and Romero, for your nice opening statements. And Commissioners, it's nice to be back in front of you again. I represent a very large team that worked on this study over the past 5 months. With me, I have Amos Callender, our project manager. You could wave back there. I have Kathleen Deakins of J-Ray, Public Outreach, and then Doug Ma here on Public Outreach as well. One of our primary consultants, HOK, based out of St. Louis, they're one of our nation's largest justice facility architects. They couldn't be back here today, but I'll be basically representing them and presenting this material. So as Romero and Rick outlined, this is a continuation of a study that's been going on since 2013, more studies in 15, and then 2018, one of our first activities was to relook at the programming needs of each of the departments that are involved in this facility. 3 years had passed since we did it in 2015, and so we revisited with all department heads and some of their key staff, and we produced 2 documents, one that did not include any city facilities, because when we look at Plum Street, there are some city facilities involved. So the first set of documents just involves county facilities, and we took a look again at what the existing conditions are, because believe it or not, things changed in those 3 years. And then we compare those existing conditions to what the actual need is, and then we project it out 30 years. Why? Because we do not want to come back to the voters and ask for more money within the duration of the funding that we're requesting. We want to look ahead to allow for future expansion in 10, 20, and even 30 years out. So, is this not working?
No, keep going.
Okay, and so you'll see on the spreadsheets there in your notebooks, as the square footage is ratcheted up from what we have to what we really should have now. There's actually quite a gap. And so then we compare it again to how much it grows over the course of 30 years. That square footage is what we use when we're actually doing all of the cost estimates, and it's consistent across the board. Doesn't matter which site. We didn't want that to be a variable. And then the other set of programming documents includes facilities for the city. If we were to locate at Plum Street, they need to replace the functions at the Creighton Justice Center. We asked the question, what do they need? What would they like? Again, same thing, projecting 30 years ahead. And then later, and you're going to see, we actually take program-driven solutions. So that means take the program as it is, as it's stated on the program sheets, and run the numbers. Or we do a budget-driven option. So we try to point it towards a certain budget amount, and then we turn around and say, this is what we would need to reduce. This is how we'd need to be more efficient. How we'd have to start construction sooner or reduce the number of phases. And so for each one of these options I'm going to show you, we're actually going to have the program-driven and the budget-driven. There's a significant difference, upwards of $100 million difference between the program-driven and the budget-driven. That's one of the other decisions as you look at the sites, is actually making a decision on which direction to go in, which site and for how much money should we go out and solicit voter approval. And so the programming, again, drove each of these solutions, and so I'm going to spend most of my time walking through each of the solutions, and they're on documents. Rick tells me that we actually have it on screen, and the first set all have to do with the Hilltop site. We have 5 solutions on that site. For the other 2 sites, only 2, and I'll explain. We weren't giving favoritism to the Hilltop. The reason is it's more complex to work around existing facilities. So there's a lot more options that we needed to study, all new or partially rehab, some new. And so this first option that we're looking at, A1, it shows you the program-driven total cost at the top of the sheet. And so I'm going to explain this a little bit so you understand it applies to all of these options. We have the construction cost. This is the hard construction cost from our cost estimator. The demolition cost is the next line item. And then the total phasing cost. If a project has to be built over, in this case, 4 to 6 years, there are a lot of costs associated with phasing. And then the soft costs, property acquisition, surveys, A&E fees, furnishings, moving costs, everything that we can possibly think of that's a part of this project has to be listed, because when we go out to voters, they commit to a certain dollar amount. We don't have the option of going back and asking for more later. We forgot something. So we're trying to be as thorough as possible. In this particular case, the option A1, $302,000. And on this option, the primary driver, you can see in the graphic above, is a new courthouse where approximately building 4 and 6 are.
You meant 302 million, right?
I'm sorry. Good grief. Thank you for correcting me. Did I say 1,000? Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Oh, golly. That was wishful thinking on my part, sorry. And so on this one, where building 4 and 6 are, there's a new courthouse. It requires one property acquisition to make this entire block available to the county. The county owns the other 3/4 of the block. And it would include a new courthouse. It could be built wholly, all by itself, within 24 months in the first phase. And the suggestion here is for a parking structure right behind it that could hold upwards of 500 parking stalls. Then later phases would then move back to where the existing buildings 1, 2, and 3 are, and would involve a complete rebuild of those buildings, but those would be the Civic Center portion or the courthouse administration. You can see the phasing is outlined there. So we were given a start date of 2022. So if the vote was in 2019, the idea was to receive some of the money there for a year or more, then get started with the design, permitting, and the actual construction start 2022. The phases would run clear out to 2027 under this program-driven scenario, and it shows you what's happening at each one of those phases. Total square footage, 335,000 square feet, and it shows the parking stalls there, 1,200 stalls is our target. Again, for all the program-driven solutions, it doesn't matter which site we're looking at, we're driving it at 1,200. That is not the need today, but our current site has just under 600 parking spaces. The need is closer to 800 to 900. If anybody was trying to park before this meeting, you knew why we're short. And so that is the summary of the program-driven. The budget-driven, you can see the summary of construction costs, demo, phasing is a lot less. Soft costs, again, significantly less. And it totals $218 million. And then the phasing down below is shortened by 1 year. This became abundantly clear and again, in the report, there's a lot of detail on the actual construction costs, but also the total project cost. Sometimes it's hard to understand how a construction cost, in this case of 133, can end up to 218 million. Again, there's a lot of soft costs, a lot in escalation. Even sales tax is almost 10%. So the need to try to shorten the overall construction and phasing, or even start construction sooner, that's a big issue that the commissioners should address. If there's any way to start this a year sooner, you're going to save a significant amount more than you would ever lose in interest charges. So that's something to consider. The square footage does get reduced. You'll see in parentheses approximately 10%. Now, if you chose to go to a program-driven option, one of our first steps would be to re-look at how does the budget-driven option actually fit on the site that you've selected, and how much square footage can we deliver for every one of the departments that are involved. as a part of the program, we include departmental grossing factors and building grossing factors, and they include what's the efficiency of the layout of the building. What about the thickness of the walls? What about all of the mechanical spaces that run through the building? All of that has to be considered. But in a more efficient building, maybe we can actually save some square footage there. So the intent would be to actually lay out conceptually how the building would actually fit on the site that you ultimately select for the dollar amount that you've selected. Also on this budget-driven option, we've backed off to 900 parking spaces. That's what we're going to need right out of the chute. But it says, look, let's allow enough space on whichever site is selected that we can add the parking in the future if we need it. And this is a big if. Transportation is changing a great deal. And with Uber, with improved transit, there might not be as much of a need, or with shared parking. Some of these sites, we have other users could be directly adjacent to us. We could actually have shared parking. So public and private sector sharing some of these parking facilities. So that is one measure that we took to back off on some of the costs, was a few less parking spaces. Now, on the reverse of that same page, this is the same pattern for all these options. We list the positives or the opportunities for this scheme, and then the constraints and challenges. The positives for this one, the public is familiar. It's an existing site. Small site acquisition costs, only one parcel. Good early phase construction of the courthouse. This allows us to literally empty buildings 2 and 3. This is really good. Of course, beautiful views from the knoll of the existing property here that we're now on. And then actions to ensure results, all of the above are readily available. Constraints and challenges, just that one parcel of land does need to be acquired. The long phasing, when you're working around an existing site, this is no small thing, because the actual ongoing operations of county government will be impacted if we choose to do the construction here on this site. On this scheme, you'll see others that are connected, but this one happens to be disconnected from the administration campus. So there's actually a road and a fair distance between the courthouse and the administration. We would have to temporarily relocate the folks in building 4 and 6 during the construction. And then the transit score, we have it for each of the 3 sites. The transit score on this site is 40. That's less than middle, and this is on a range of 1 to 100. And the reason for, we are served by transit here, but only one line, and we're kind of at the end of the line. And so that transit score, is it going to improve? Perhaps, but only marginally. The walk score at 21, it's the lowest of all 3 sites. That has to do with the amount of amenities that are readily available, or people's ability to actually walk to work. Very low on this site. And it really has primarily to do with our geographic isolation. Very steep slopes. We have a lake on one side. So we're limited in terms of the amount of commercial or residential that surrounds this site. So limited off-site economic impact on this site. Actions to overcome the issues, early agreement on property acquisition, try to lessen the number of phases, starting construction sooner. Improving the pedestrian circulation between the 2 sites, so there's an opportunity. The road that separates us right now could become an actual pedestrian mall, improving the circulation. And then trying to marginally improve the transit and walk scores. So that is option A1. Now I'm going to go through the others because they follow the same pattern a little bit quicker. On option A2, look at the graphic above. This is showing a new courthouse right on the footprint of Building 3. So Building 3 would literally be demolished. You would have to relocate the occupants of Building 3 while the courthouse is being constructed. And then in the place, again, where about the old jail was on the back side of Building 3 is parking structure. So it's literally connected to the lower levels of the courthouse. And then a later phase would be the new court administration that's over the footprint. That and the lobby are over the footprint of Building 2. Building 1 could remain occupied and operational during the construction of these. The benefit of this scheme, those 2 buildings are now connected by a common lobby, so one single point of security for the entire facility. That's a big plus. And so you can see the program-driven costs on this one because of its consolidation, 276 million. Still 5 years of phasing. Again, 1,200 stalls. And then on the budget-driven, it goes down to 214 million. The square footage, again, goes down to just over 300,000. The phasing is still at 5 years. It's hard to change that with the building replacements that we're going through on this one. So if we look to the back about the pros and cons, again, the same pros on this one. Another positive, the proximity of the structured parking to the adjacent courthouse and the single point of security, all very good positives. The constraints and challenges, again, some of them similar to A1. The construction staging on this type of an approach would be very challenging because we'd actually be operating buildings 1 and 2 while construction is going on right next door. Future expansion would be limited. So you can see how the wings of the courthouse and the administration in the diagram above, they're right at the edges of the site. So future expansion beyond the 30 years could be challenging on this type of an approach. And then actions to overcome, again, very similar to the previous A scheme. So that is A2. A3, this is intriguing in that this shows a new courthouse and administration building that are built at the top of the slope in front of buildings 1, 2, and 3. So you could literally build this in a much shorter time than any of the schemes that I've shown you thus far. It is built close to the edge, but you'll notice the part of the building, the administration that's built close to the edge, is at the hill that's the shallowest. We back off from the edge of the hill as it gets steeper and steeper as you move north on the site. And then ultimately, as we're able to demolish buildings 2 and 3, that is the footprint of the new parking structure. And so the costs for this one, just under 289 million. This is a little bit faster, 4 years of construction. Again, the 1,200 stalls. We are able to surplus the other sites because all of this is now on the knoll. And I'll point out, the approach to contemporary courthouse design is very different than it was roughly 30 years ago when the current courthouse, and what I mean is, we're going to design this correctly. We're separating the public from the in custody from the courthouse. The only time they ever meet is in the courtroom. What this means is we require a lot of vertical elevators through the building, and so the taller you go with this building, the more efficient it gets. The more you spread it out, the lower it is, the more in custody elevators you have to have. You need 1 elevator for every 2 courtrooms. In custody comes up directly into the courtroom. They come up from a holding area that's in the lowest level. Think of it as a basement level of this building. They are being brought over through vans or buses on a regular basis throughout the court day, so usually 2 trips, and they're held in there, and it's on demand. So when court says they're ready, up the elevator they come. And so this design on all sites is meant to be the appropriate way to lay out a courtroom in contemporary design. And so on the budget-driven option for A3, we're at 234 million. Again, 4 years of construction, and again, 900 stalls, so just less structured parking on this site. A4, this is unusual, but it was at the early request of county staff and, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so let me flip to the positives and the constraints of A3. And here again, this one, another one of the positives, the single point of security for the entire complex. And the construction of the courthouse and administration buildings can occur in one early phase. This is very important in that we could actually build this entire thing and then empty out buildings 1, 2, and 3. So even though it would be tight, you're going to see that on the construction, on the constraint side, you're going to see how in the heck are we going to operate this existing buildings 1, 2, and 3, when we're taking up all the parking, well, people are going to have to park on remote locations and literally walk. It's unpleasant, and they're going to have to do it for at least 2 years, but that's one of the constraints of doing this approach. And then actions to overcome, again, whatever we can do to shorten the construction phasing and duration, which again, this scheme is doing, is heading in the right direction. So the next one is option A4. This one involved, the question was asked, so we needed to explore it to see if physically we could do it, and the answer was yes. And what this involves in the diagram above, it is a new tall courthouse that is literally fit between buildings 1 and 2, the existing buildings 1 and 2. Now, constructability-wise, this would be a heck of a challenge, but it will physically fit. And so once you construct this new building, then under the program-driven, we would literally rebuild buildings 1 and 2 with the new court administration. Or, under the budget-driven, we might just adaptively reuse buildings 1 and 2. That is not our recommendation. These buildings are not designed to current seismic standards, structural standards. They're limited to the height of the building. And so if we literally rebuild them, the first thing a contractor is going to ask is, why are you doing that? It's more cost effective to tear them down and rebuild them. But this is a scheme that actually allows us to do that, because I think the question will be asked by voters, well, what if we just adaptively reuse the existing buildings? So in this case, we did study that. And so the program-driven option on this one, $303 million over 5 years, again, 1,200 parking stalls. And then the budget-driven option, $214 million. We narrowed it down to 4 years of construction, and the budget-driven 900 stalls. The positives and the negatives, again, single point of security contact, the construction of the courthouse and admin together. In one early phase, the courthouse is in one early phase, very tall building. And the constraints on this one, the construction staging, it would be very difficult, challenging. It could be done, but very challenging. And I should mention that in all of our cost estimate, we had a detailed cost estimator working with us, but we went one step further. We actually reached out to one of our largest contractors in our country, but they happen to be very active in the Pacific Northwest, and they also happen to be doing courthouse work with our team now. They're called Mortensen Construction, and they did this pro bono, and what we asked them to do was, please analyze our cost estimate. Tell us, have we missed anything? And they gave us a lot of feedback, but we tested these things about, what about the construction phase? And so they would suggest, based on this kind of tight site, we'd adjust some of your construction costs in this way. So we were testing it against real time, real contractors. And so let's see if I can point out any other things on this one. So again, tight construction on that one. And the last one, again, very intriguing in the layout of this one, in that this would involve the construction of a new courthouse. You can see on the diagram above, right off the northern edge of Building 1. In our cost estimating, we said we would have to temporarily relocate everybody in Building 1 because it's so close to the footprint of Building 1. But you're literally building an entire new courthouse, and then you're doing the new court administration. You can see there on the west side of the site. They are connected by a common lobby down below. It gives the entire point, the knoll of the site, back to the public, so there's actually a park that the public can access. In between the sites, the two buildings, is a large public space drop-off area, good access, and you can see two new parking structures. And again, the idea is to consolidate the parking right next to where the uses actually are. And so the cost for this one, $307 million. Again, 5 years. This is total phasing. You can see the phasing years below. And then 1,200 stalls. The budget-driven was $231 million. Again, we shortened the construction phasing to 4 years and delivered 900 stalls. This will allow the surplusing of buildings, the property at buildings 4, 5, and 6, and that is reflected in the costs, by the way. And then again, single point of contact, early construction of courthouse and admin can occur in one early phase, allowing the other buildings to be emptied all at once. Again, construction staging on site is one of the constraints, the challenges. The future phasing is somewhat limited. It's a little bit better in that we do have a little bit of expansion space to the south. And again, actions to overcome issues, shortening the schedule, starting sooner and fewer construction phases would be preferable.
So Ron, before you go to the next site, I just want to make one comment in regards to the Hilltop. We have also had quite a few conversations with Kidder Matthews, who's a local but national broker as well, and they have indicated that there is a very high likelihood of having available lease space that's in the loop area of the Hilltop if one of those options were selected. So I think that's somewhat positive because it could still give us the ability to keep our government activities in at least the same vicinity.
Thank you for mentioning that. And I will say that at Rick and Romero's urging, we did include in the total project costs all the costs associated with leasing other buildings for a few years, but then there's costs. You have to design that space, you have to do tenant improvements, you have to actually move people there and then move them back. All of those costs are included in the total project cost. And I should have mentioned, I should have given a bit of an overview on the Hilltop site in that it is just short of 26 acres. However, only roughly 15 to 16 acres are actually usable because of the steep slopes and other public areas that are around there. And I did mention the other transit score and that sort of thing. And so for comparison purposes, I'm going to give you some of the sizes of the other sites so you can draw the comparison. So the next one is option B1. This is the city's existing property, and we only studied what the city owns. There are opportunities for other property acquisition directly adjacent that could take some pressure off of the size of these facilities or how they can spread around the site. But for the sake of simplicity, we've kept with the 10.5 acres roughly that the city owns here. There are some wetlands adjacent to this site, and our schemes do assume that we would do wetland exchange, it's called. So they're very small on site that we'd actually do mitigation off site so that we could actually use the entire 10.5 acres. Now, on this site does require the temporary relocation of the Creighton Justice Center. Again, that's included in the cost estimate. So they would move off. It's roughly 23,000 square feet would move off site. During the construction. The construction of this on B1, you can see it aligns the courthouse and administration with Plum Street. So, and a lobby, common lobby in between. The access to the site could have one access off of Plum Street, but the primary access would be off of 8th Street. A new parking structure. So in this particular site, wholly 90% of the parking has to be provided in a parking structure because of the limited size of the site. That is not a problem. That's actually a benefit in terms of proximity of the parking to the buildings. It does cost more, but long term, the parking is going to be directly adjacent to both of these buildings, so that's a good thing. Now, in this scheme, it actually shows the displacement of the Yashiro Gardens. Now, I want to encourage people that the next scheme is going to keep the Yashiro Gardens. And so in this particular scheme, the total cost came out to $315 million. Now the good news on this one is it can be done in 2 years. Everything from start to end, I'm talking construction, in 2 years. Under this scheme, you would literally keep operating on your existing site until the building was done, and literally over a course of days, you would move into the new facility. Everything would be up and running, all the commissioning of all the mechanical systems, electrical, and again, everything would be up and running, so you literally move in. So that's a very big positive of this approach on this site or the site that we're going to talk about shortly. The square footage, again, on this one is now up at 381,000. So there's roughly 45,000 square feet for the city's municipal function. Now, I remember I said 23 currently. Remember, they're looking ahead to what they need. Their facilities are woefully inadequate, especially their jail, their holding facility. And so we took the departments at face value, what they asked for. Later, on the program-driven option, you're going to see a scheme that doesn't quite half that, but it drastically reduces. How we do that is we say that the city's need for their municipal court is literally sharing 2 courtrooms with county. We're not building a separate municipal courtroom. There are other functions, lobbies, and other things that they're sharing with the county. So that's what allows us to more shared space, but we still have the city's municipal facility with their own access off of the main lobby. So the desire was people clearly understood where the City of Olympia functions were as opposed to the county functions, and that's been maintained in both the program and budget-driven option here. Okay, so again, program-driven, $315 million. The budget-driven, $237 million. And then on the...
Ron, before you go to the
Go ahead.
constraints, could you talk just for a minute about the shared costs between the city and the county as well?
Give me a little bit more.
Well, when we did the breakout costs for the city
Yeah.
for planning purposes as well.
And so what Rick is asking is, the question comes, when we compare this facility with any of the other sites, and you can see the costs are going up, and then the cost for the city's 45,000 square feet, we actually identified all of the costs associated with that, both the construction costs, the hard cost for that 45,000, but also they would be sharing the cost of the parking. We have to provide parking. They would also be sharing in the costs of all the soft costs that I mentioned that get us the total project costs, or if there's some cost for them to relocate off the facility. And so we gave a detailed analysis so at least council members, other staff could understand how did they come up with this number. So we did give detail both for program-driven and the budget-driven option. And so was there anything else you wanted me to say about that? And so on the backside of that, the positives and the constraints, I'll point out a few of these because it's the first site that we're looking at that's actually away from the hilltop. So one of the biggest advantages of the 2 new sites is that they're a single phase of construction. This is significant in terms of saving on phasing costs. The transit score on this site is 56. This is the highest transit score of all of the sites. Why? Because 3 sides of this site are bordered by transit routes, and we actually have transit stops bordering 3 sides of this site. The walk score, again, is by far the highest on this site, 85. There's a lot of commercial opportunities around this site. The off-site economic impact could be modest to high. There's a significant amount of, I'm going to call it, with no offense to the existing property owners, it's underutilized properties between Plum Street and what most would consider the higher density downtown Olympia. There's roughly 3 to 4 blocks and a lot of single-story warehouse spaces. It has started transitioning. We obviously right across Plum Street have 4 and 5 and 6-story buildings that are leased by state departments. And so the ability to have future economic impact in a positive way is very high on this. Brew pubs, brew pubs, and there's a property directly across Casamia Restaurant. That family owns more property than the restaurant right now. There's a good directly example, but there's also, it should be pointed out, Vine Street. They're a developer, local. They happen to own a big parking lot that's on this block. They own property that's right across the street, office buildings that's leased. There's a good example of somebody who might be interested in joint parking agreements. And so with some of these sites come opportunities, public-private opportunities. And then some of the constraints on this site, I'll point out a few of them. Again, the Creighton Justice Center would have to be relocated for 2 years. Now, that includes the administrative, but also the jail functions. A little bit tougher to do, but it can be done. Okay, here's one that goes along with this site. The limited site size requires the building to be a little bit taller, a couple of stories taller than on other sites, and courtroom floors are taller than typical office buildings, 17 to 18 feet as opposed to 10 to 12 feet. Therefore, this building along Plum Street would be 116 feet tall. We're already working, I should say we, Rick, Romero, are working with the city to find out what is the process and what steps would we need to go through to ensure us that this would actually be approved and allowed. Hard to pick this site if we can't have some reassurance that it's actually going to be allowed. And so we're working on that diligently. The limit site size does require that the vast majority of this parking be structured. And I gave you the pros and con. Cost, pro, all the parking is very close to the site. Let's see, the small wetlands having to be mitigated off-site. The site has to be purchased. If we're on a hilltop, only one small site. This one has to be purchased. The City of Olympia cost for new municipal spaces, it ranges from 22 to 32 million. That's on the budget-driven versus the program-driven. That's why the range. Poor soils, we would have to do pilings on this site. We are actively working on sites that are around this property. Our sites have gone anywhere from 80 feet to over 115 feet deep with pilings. And I want to reassure folks, though, a lot of our buildings that we're doing dozens, literally, in Olympia, a lot of them downtown, are on pilings, and that piling foundation does help prevent any negative impacts from liquefaction. And this is, again, the quality of the soils are poor below some of these sites. Why? Because this was part of East Bay. It literally stretched all the way up to Union Avenue. And so, again, this is not a reason to stay away from a site. It's just simply a cost that needs to be incurred on a site like this. Let's see, anything else? The site is close to the East Side Neighborhood Association, but you'll notice the construction of the tall buildings, they're all pushed to the west side. So you have an entire very large block that's separating the site, the tall buildings, from the smaller scale buildings in the East Side Neighborhood Association. Another that we've done is we've purposely not shown any SAT access from East Side Street. Again, that's more getting into the residential area. We tried to keep site access from Plum, 8th, and Union. And then limited expansion space. We do have some on this site. And then the Plum Street Village would need to be relocated in the future. So that's a project meant to serve some of the needs of our houseless, would need to in the future be relocated. And you can see on the actions to overcome, early agreements with the City of Olympia on purchase and costs of new municipal space, early agreements with the city on the height of the building, and then again, there already are tall buildings directly west of this site, so that does help mitigate the size of this proposed building. And again, more early environmental and soil investigation to confirm our assumptions on the type of foundations needed under this site. Okay, option B2. This had more support in our public outreach and probably from the consultant team as well. Here what we're doing is we leave the courthouse along Plum Street, but to the east of that we put a new court administration building, so you're lessening the wall of buildings along Plum Street. And notice all of Yashiro Gardens is kept, and our recommendation is we actually continue Yashiro Gardens to the east. So you're actually you're playing on what is considered a benefit of this site, and that is actually helping to screen the parking structure from the East Side Neighborhood Association. You can see that, I guess, new plantings to the east of the parking structure. This option also has very good access right off of Plum Street. So this is people's first inclination, was as you come to the site off of the I-5, you have a main entrance drop-off area right in front of the main lobby and then directly into the parking structure. So this whole approach on this site can be very easily understood, and that's usually a very good thing from an urban design standpoint. The costs of this one, $313 million on the program-driven option. Again, same square footage, 381,000, 1,200 stalls. On the budget-driven, it's gone down to $236 million. Again, the overall project timeline, only 2 years, and we've reduced it to 900 stalls by reducing the size of the parking structure. So that is scheme B2. Scheme C1, and
Were there any other opportunities or constraints for anyone?
thank you. Thank you. Let me see if there was any others that I wanted to point out. Again, single phase of construction, high walk scores, the common lobby, and most of the other constraints are the same as they were for B1. And a positive here again is that we're keeping Yashiro Gardens on this approach. So
Ron, before you
yeah.
go, it seems to me both sites that are looked at off the hilltop would also have the potential benefit of economic development of the hilltop.
Yes,
Is that
thank you.
factored in somewhere?
Thank you for pointing that out, and the answer is yes. Now, I'm gonna, it's not a qualifier, but in order to have an apples-to-apples comparison, the county did hire a consultant to do appraisals of all these projects. So every property that I mentioned that we'd have to acquire, it was an appraisal. Or, as Judge points out, you could then surplus this entire site. Not just building 1, 2, 3, but buildings 4, 5, and 6. No more need for any of that. Tremendous value to that. But we only took the appraised value. That is included. So when we do the total project cost, and at the bottom of it, it says less the sale price of the existing county property here on the hilltop. So good, thank you for pointing that out.
The number was put on that?
Pardon?
Sorry, I didn't follow. As a number?
Yes,
What
yes.
is that?
Yes, it's shown in the detailed cost estimate. So since you're asking.
I missed last one, I apologize. It's not in this.
And these are good questions, but I want to allow sufficient time for Ron to get through this and leave a good 30 minutes for us to get all of our stuff out, all of our questions out.
I will, if you can, in the question period, ask me that again.
Okay.
And I'll give you the cost. Okay.
And I
Thank you.
will just mention that the entire draft report is available online at our website, as well as the presentation that we're going through today.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go on to C1. Similar to Plum Street, this is wholly away from the hilltop site, but one of the things I should mention that I'm very appreciative of the sites, the 3 that we ended up with, because they're very different one from another. So you're not going to feel hemmed in by choosing 2 sites that are no, very different. So in this one, we have 27 acres that is all developable. I'll repeat, not 10 and a half, not 16, 27, all developable. Now, I can tell you that's more site than you want, than you need. Well, what this is going to allow you to do, and I'm going to explain this, is public-private partnerships. You buy a certain portion of this land and leave the other portion for private development. So you could actually be building up other offices, other retail spaces directly adjacent. Somebody else is doing that on the private side. Or that private development can share in the costs of the roads that have to be extended through this site, the parking that might be needed, the stormwater costs that will need to be incurred on this site. And so this could be viewed as a very positive thing on developing on a site like this. So C1, on the top of the page is Harrison Avenue. It's just off the diagram here. On the left is Kaiser. We're actually separated by other property owners from Kaiser, except for at the south end of this site. Our property does touch Kaiser, and our property does touch 7th, which is off the bottom of the sheet here. Now, this scheme, what's unique about it, we have a new courthouse building and a new courthouse administration, but because of the site size, these buildings can now be as low as 5 stories, 4 and 5 stories, not 8 stories, like the Plum Street site. And what we've chosen to do, it's not what we'd recommend for sustainable design reasons, but we showed a scheme that literally has 1,200 surface parking spaces so that our budget could actually reflect that. We wanted to drive the cost down to show what would it be like. And so on this scheme, we have a total project cost of $260 million. It is all done in 2 years' time. Again, 1,200 parking stalls. And I should have mentioned on the north portion of this site, we're showing actual private development. As you come into the site off of Harrison, the first buildings, they're just like Don Juan's in that single story, whether it's 1 or 2 story, but it's commercial right along that new access drive parking that's behind it. This is what the city land use plan calls for, this type of an arrangement. And then the county actually acquires the lower portion of this site. Now, we have also shown an access drive that goes straight out to Kaiser. It's in the southwest corner of this site. As a part of the long-range transportation planning, there is an off-ramp that is planned right at Kaiser Road. This is a westbound off-ramp and an eastbound on-ramp. This would literally put you hundreds of yards away from this site. Very close access, very good access, because people are not driving up to Harrison. They're literally coming right off of Kaiser, right in. The city would probably require us to improve Kaiser, again, from that new off-ramp to Harrison. I'm not trying to put words in their mouth. I'm trying to anticipate what they might require to make sure our off-site construction costs reflect this. And you'll see that in our total project cost. I think it was $6 million we applied to all off-site costs on this option. Now, there's no guarantee that the freeway off-ramp would be built by the time this construction is done. And you'll see that in some of our action items is we encourage the county, if this site was selected, to circle right back with our legislative representatives that helped us to get the extension on the levee lid lift and say, one more thing, we'd like your help and support in seeing if we can't move up the timeline to that freeway off-ramp. That did come up when we were meeting with folks on the west side neighborhood. So budget driven, 198 million, so we're clear below 200 million on this approach. And again, only 2 years. The positives and constraints, again, single phase of construction. There is adequate area for surface parking. The soils are likely good enough for spread footings, no pilings. We feel strongly about this because we are doing a lot of construction projects directly adjacent to this site, directly to the south. They are on spread footings. There is no need to purchase the entire 27 acres, only purchase the land area that you need. There is enough site area, this is a positive of this one, to allow for future expansion beyond the 30-year window. We have enough site area that we can horizontally expand both of these buildings. If we needed to add structured parking, we do surface at the beginning, add structure in the first, we can do that as well. So good site flexibility here. This is an interesting one in that we were involved in working with the neighborhood, the west side neighborhood, over the past few years with the city, was the lead agency, to upzone this. I don't want to say upzone, but they changed the zone from PORM to HDC4 to allow flexibility in what could be developed on this site. I can tell you that the density of the development that we're proposing here is actually less than will be allowed under HDC4. It's less height, less density, less parking, and so that would be part of our messaging as we go out to the community. And then the whole idea of shared development costs between public and private sector, very real on this site. Constraints on this one, the transit score was low, only 34. We might be a few ticks above that because Intercity Transit did extend their line to Kaiser, like within the last, 4 months. Instead of being a few blocks away, they are now turning from Harrison to Kaiser to 7th. But again, it's at the end of their line. So it's only so far that this is going to be increased. The walk score at 50 was middling, again, on a 1 to 100 scale, but this could definitely increase significantly with a lot more commercial development. And by the way, more commercial retail development is what HDC4 is all about. There's a lot of residential that's been added in this neighborhood, and they need services to support them. And this was identified as a great site for that mixed use. It was also designed in the planning for a potential park, whether it was a softscape park, hardscape, but a park. And you're going to see that in the next scheme that I'm going to show you. Actions to overcome some of the issues on this: early agreements with the current property owner. and agreements with the City of Olympia on height. I mentioned the height. The height is actually like 5 feet above what the existing allowable height is. We're fixed, and again, I mentioned on the courthouse heights, they just inch up. And the current City of Olympia heights, they're allowed to go up to 2 stories taller if you have residential. These buildings aren't going to have residential, so that's what squeezes us beyond the current height limit. So getting early agreements that we're going to be allowed to do that. Circling back with Intercity Transit to talk about improved service to a site like this. And again, just early environmental and soil investigation on this site would be very important to confirm some of our cost assumptions. The next scheme is intriguing in that it's taking full advantage of this whole public-private partnership. On this scheme, you're going to see a large town square immediately west of the new courthouse building and the new court administration building. You literally have private development on the west side of this new shared courtyard. And then this suggestion here to the east of the new court administration is a combination of surface parking and structured parking. This is a recommendation from a sustainable design standpoint. It doesn't make much sense to keep spreading your parking covering. It would cover almost 8 acres to do 1,200 stalls on all surface parking. We could drastically reduce the amount of paved land, get parking closer. So to draw an analogy, you would be upwards of 2 city blocks away if you parked at the outer reaches of the parking lot and tried to make it back under the C1. This is trying to get some parking closer and allow for, again, joint public-private parking opportunities. And the park that was designated for this area is the town square. So you're making dual use for the county, the private development, but also for the surrounding community. Very good drop-off area. Again, this assumes commercial development on the north half of the site. So a lot of shared road and stormwater development between public and private is possible here. The program-driven costs for this one, $275 million. Again, built in 2 years. The budget-driven, $208 million. Again, building in 2 years, 900 stalls. I will mention that on this scheme, like the Plum Street required pilings, this is going to require stormwater detention on site. The other 2 sites, Hilltop and Plum, we do what's called point source treatment, but then we release directly to the city's stormwater lines and lot stormwater lines because the size of the lines are large enough. Here, they're very adequate for this development, but we have to hold a certain amount of the stormwater on site and then controlled release. And that means either surface, you've seen these big stormwater pond that's exposed, or below grade structures. They cost a little bit more, but allows us to develop the site more efficiently. That will be required on this site. Now, the positives and constraints of this one, again, shared lobby, very good. Lower buildings, great expansion potential, great public partnerships, public-private partnerships. Again, we even acquire less property on this scheme than we did on the C1 scheme. And again, it's already zoned for a high-density zone. And the constraints, really what I mentioned before, just aligning the construction schedule of that new off-ramp with the construction of the new courthouse. The civic presence of buildings built on this site would be less than the other 2 sites. It's further away from town, but in essence, you're creating the presence by the construction of the buildings themselves. It's just less prominent than the other sites. And so, again, the actions are very similar to what I mentioned in C1. Early agreements on costs, cost sharing, that type of thing, heights of building, and that sort of thing. So that is an overview of each of the 3 sites, the options that we studied, the costs, what was included programmatically. And so I'd like to just make myself and the rest of my team available to address any questions that folks have from this point forward.
Thank you. What a tremendous amount of information to digest. Digesting, again, everything. There's quite a bit. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So everybody take a deep breath.
Yeah.
and release, and now we'll start the question and answer. And I would just hope that everybody would just ask, you don't get just one question, but ask a question, not editorialize and then get your question. Ask the question. We got about 25 minutes to get all of our information out and information back. So you're not limited to questions, just no editorializing. Let's just get the question and answers going. Please. Jeff.
Thank you. So my question has to do with scheme, my first question has to do with scheme A5.
Okay.
And the relocation of the occupants of building 1 during construction.
Yes.
I know at various times the state agencies are located up here on the hill relocate, but will it be possible to put all of the occupants of building 1 into a single building?
Yes, but that would depend on the availability of the lease space at the time we actually needed to lease. So if I said yes today, that might not be the case then. And so fortunately, you have very distinct departments. I'll give you an example. Could we keep the assessor, auditor, and treasurer co-located in one building while planning and maybe commissioners are in another? We would try to do those type of things because there are certain efficiencies that you take advantage of now that we would try to maintain.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, since Mayor Selby asked the question, and I have it right in front of me, the sale price for the Hilltop properties was assessed at $4.4 million.
It's about the same as the city properties
Yeah,
downtown.
correct.
Interesting.
It is. And so, and why I drew the attention to
I think the Hilltop is close to 7.
Oh, I'm sorry.
7
Am I
or
looking at the
7.
wrong one?
Yeah.
Oh, there's proceeds from sale. Forgive me. Oh, 7.8. Thank you. Thank you, Romero. Thank you, Rick. 7.8, and the city's acquisition of the cities was 4.4. Thank you. 7.8 for the county property. And again, that does not necessarily mean that's what it would fetch in the open market.
And that's just assessed or appraised?
Just the appraised. Yep, appraised value. Okay, Commissioner.
Go ahead, John.
Ron, I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on expansion opportunities in each location. So for instance, is there ways to construct so that additional expansion could go up over time? Would there be a requirement that the county be looking at acquiring land over time if the expansion?
Yeah.
Obviously, the Harrison site has lots of opportunities already.
Yeah.
I'd just like you to flesh that out a little bit more if possible.
Thank you. I'll give you an example. Knowing that we'd be limited in our horizontal expansion on the Plum Street site, that building is actually designed with an entire extra floor in the stack that we would design it, in this particular case, we could have a prosecutor on an entire floor, but the height is enough to allow for it to be converted in the future to courtrooms. And so that's an example where we're building the shell and we're actually able to allow for future expansion within the framework of the existing building. It is much more cost effective to do future additions to an office building. And I will mention that all of the courthouse administration spaces were all designed and priced out at a Class A office building. So it would be similar. It's meant to be a building that will last 50 to 100 years. It's very high quality, very energy efficient. And I should have mentioned that all the cost estimates reflect a building that is LEED certified to a high degree, efficient mechanical systems that are going to be energy saving, trying to reduce the amount of ongoing operational costs. So to get back to your question, other sites, it is very cost effective to expand. Now I'm going to look at beyond 30 years. We wanted to expand, we would go horizontally, not vertically. It is very costly to upgrade all of your foundations and all the, in this case, probably steel to allow for the possibility of a future, as opposed to simply adding horizontally. And we could site the buildings, some of them on Hilltop, definitely on Harrison, and even some, the administration building on Plum can allow for some horizontal expansion. In the case of the courthouse, we want to add 2 courtrooms every time we expand, because I mentioned the in-custody elevator for each new 2 courtrooms. So that's a really good example of how we could, in the future, add, depending on the height of the building, anywhere from 6 to 10 courtrooms by simply adding 2 courtrooms times 3 to 5 floors. So again, somewhat limited on some of these hilltop sites, much better on Harrison, and some constraints on the Plum Street. Good question.
Anyone? Hey, Jeff?
I'll take my second shot here. B1 and B2, the downtown site.
Yes.
Do your estimated costs include the cost? Is it an entire cost and the city will be sharing part of that, or are the city's shared costs in addition to what you presented?
That's a good question. The costs that are reflected in B1 and B2 are the entire cost for everybody. Then we break out, this is what portion is the city's cost. So if you wanted to take the total cost, I'll give you an example. On the program-driven cost, $315 million for B1, you would subtract $32 million, and that would give you the cost to the county. And now, I will mention, this is information that we, the consultant, are generating that we are giving the city. The city hasn't had a chance to either question us on these costs or say, they asked for how much square footage on the program-driven. That is why on the budget-driven, we ratcheted way back. Because, I'll give you an example, on the jail, they might have wanted to expand the jail to their capacity. What if we didn't? We kept it closer to what its current size is, but designed it to, let's just say that it meets the current needs of a jail facility much better than the current one does. We're doing a lot of work on that building, and I'm telling you, it's at the end of its life. That's, again, consultant's opinion, consultant's opinion on that one. And so you literally take whatever on the budget-driven, it said $237 million. In that case, you would take $22 million off of it to get to the actual county costs. Yeah.
Okay. Judge?
I just want to confirm, in terms of the costs, we know that there are costs unrelated to this project, but associated with the result of people who don't make it to court, dependent in some respect on the location of the courthouse.
Yes.
With respect specifically to the Harrison location, that would be a completely new location in terms of people going to court and going to the courthouse. And I know that you've considered, as you've discussed, that transition has some cost, whether it is monetary or not, in transitioning, people understanding, oh, the treasurer's over there now, or that sort of thing. It's a little bit more quantifiable when we're talking about a courthouse and someone not making it to court, additional jail days, which we have a number for, that sort of thing. Yeah. In any of your cost considerations, did you take into account or attempt to monetize that cost of specifically of the Harrison location?
Very good question, Judge Murphy. And I would say, no, that goes beyond. It's difficult for us to quantify. That's operational costs. The only operational costs that we addressed had more to do with energy costs, and we can actually put in our cost estimates more efficient, perhaps even renewable energy costs. But what you're talking about is operational costs in people missing court dates, as an example, inconvenience, or juries. Jury members is a really good, easy, quantifiable one on this current site. Sometimes jurors have to park blocks away. We can't handle our jury orientation. We're limited on the size. So there's physical things that we could do for each of these facilities on each of the sites to try to reduce the ongoing operational impacts, and that's the intent here. And so your question starts to address, I like to point out the history of these courthouses. Some of you are have keen interest in this, but we have two of the past 4 courthouses. We're sitting in one of them right now. The buildings that are significant buildings in our city, in our county, that are still there today. They're used for other functions right now, but the point is those were 100-year buildings. They're the Superintendent of Public Instructions and the other buildings on 11th and Capitol, kind of a building that's seen a number of new wonderful uses in that building, very significant building. And this building is the outlier to all of them. It was designed, we got a lot of square footage. When I was a young architect, I was doing the drafting for this facility, and I know it's a wood frame building, it's got a brick veneer, and we just built as much square footage as we could, got as much surface parking, but now, I'm trying to do the math, roughly 40 years later, its building systems are literally falling apart, literally. We had an electrical problem here, electrical line. And so part of the story to voters is establishing the need. Because most voters, they're not this involved and interested in this facility. They're going to say, what's wrong with the existing facility? What's the problem? We need to make it very clear what's the problem. But then we need to make it very clear, what does it mean to have a 50 to 100-year building, and why is that important for me? Ongoing operations. The county will pay far more in ongoing operations over the next 100 years on this building than they'll ever pay on the original construction. So it's our fiduciary responsibility to make it as efficient as we possibly can be, both in operations, to what Judge Murphy just said, but also in its ongoing physical operations from central services standpoint. What are we paying in energy costs? So if we do a mindful job, it's going to be a very good facility for up to 100 years for the citizens of Thurston County.
Thank you. So before I get to you, Mayor, you're not going to be here Tuesday when we need to decide on a location, is that correct?
Hopefully he'll be here.
I will make myself available.
Okay, so I know we have questions, but go ahead, Mayor.
Yes.
Selby.
Checking my calendar. Do you want, I apologize for my lack of voice. Do you want someone from the city up here on Tuesday?
The city rep up here?
City of Olympia. Do you want, while you're discussing, so we can bounce questions around, or?
The intent is really to provide the commissioners the forum
So just
for them to
just the
talk
quorum of the
among
three of you.
themselves.
Okay.
And certainly, I mean, if there's city representatives, they can be available to answer any questions that the commissioners may have.
Well, that's what I was
But
wondering,
really-
if you wanted some staff here to
Yeah,
answer any questions.
that'll be beneficial,
That'd be
but
good,
again,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just for the commissioners to have the opportunity to talk among themselves.
Totally understand, but if you had just in this, for
I'll
the
get to
sake
my
of
questions
time.
eventually. Go ahead.
Okay, then the question, I guess some comments. It just seems like the hilltop options, to me, are not feasible when you take into consideration that early money is cheaper than later money, and just push it out 4 to 5 years. Right there's a factor, as well as the toll that it's going to take not only on the staff to be shuffled around and try to figure out all these different points of access and their own parking, but the community's parking. I can't imagine trying to come to the county courthouse to pay a bill or ask a question or register to vote, and you're just in this construction zone for 4 to 5 years.
Excuse me, Mayor?
Yeah.
Do you have a question in there, or are you just going to give, because we have limited
Okay.
time, we've got 3 more people to ask questions.
All right. Well, I would like to know a point of process. What do I take back to my council? Because I think you're going to want us to have some chime in on this, because
Yep.
we have influence on ballot measures. So that's my question. Is how do you want to, you're going to make a decision on Tuesday, but I haven't taken this to my council yet. So don't you want some of our feedback as well?
Well, I would. So how do we go ahead and facilitate that then between now and Tuesday?
I believe Rick is scheduled to provide a briefing to the council. Is that correct?
We, excuse me, we're going to be meeting with the Land Use Committee
Okay.
on the 24th of January.
But it sounds like a decision's already going to be made by then.
Yes, because we're scheduled to make the decision on Tuesday,
That is the
the
schedule.
15th.
Wow, I apologize for missing the meeting last month. That seemed a little scary to me, that we're not going to have a chance as a council. I know it's not all about Olympia, but it is in our city, and we do have some political influence in this region.
Yes, you do. Yeah, that's undeniable.
So, is there any chance we're having a council retreat this weekend? I know it's really late notice.
When is your retreat? Saturday?
It's tomorrow afternoon and from 9 to 2 on Saturday.
If I could make a suggestion,
Please.
Commissioner, that if I was to make myself available, basically on call, so when they got to their point of their retreat and they wanted to ask questions, detailed questions about options, sites, costs, that I would be available to answer whatever questions they had. I don't know if Rick wanted to join me, but in order to facilitate this idea that their input would be, heard prior to the meeting on the 15th.
How many of these meetings have we had briefings? We've had numerous, haven't we?
Yeah.
And your council has been invited to every one of these meetings, haven't they?
No.
But they've been open to the public.
Yeah.
The only reason I say that is because your availability to the retreat is beautiful.
Yeah.
And they're going to ask questions. They're going to get a ton of information to themselves or for themselves.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing, though, is the mayor wants council to interact with the commission. No?
Just discuss amongst the council and then
so-
come back and
yeah.
report.
Okay.
Okay.
Back to you, Dr.
I-
Then that's a brilliant idea then.
Just FYI.
I view their process very similar to what we're going to do on the 15th, is they want a chance to discuss it amongst themselves, do a deep dive.
Just we did this,
yeah.
so we need.
Oh, perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ty.
Tuesday, when is it, what's our meeting time?
From 2 to 3:30 in the afternoon. That's what I have scheduled.
Is there ability to add a 1:30 with City of Olympia after they've reviewed this weekend, prior to then us?
Oh, absolutely, and that's what I suggest, that the City of Olympia should be probably representative, be available hopefully on Tuesday afternoon to provide the feedback, but
I'm
so
trying to help you guys.
so in terms of,
Yeah.
so if I can understand your question, Mayor, of the process, what you're requesting is perhaps for the council to have the opportunity to hear the same story, and perhaps not necessarily get to the point of deciding on the site, but perhaps providing a perspective to the commissioners.
Yes.
Okay. So so this weekend, I wasn't aware of the retreat. That would be a perfect opportunity if you can allow some time
I'll
for
try and
Rick
squeeze out-
and
I'll-
Ron to
we're gonna
provide
squeeze
the
out.
same, perhaps the same 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And be available for questions.
I could do abbreviated.
And then,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we will bring the feedback on Tuesday.
Okay, good, good.
Okay, I'll go right and talk to Steve Hall right now and see.
Thank you.
what's gonna be.
Thank you.
Yep, we'll figure it out.
Okay, Ty, you got
Can
questions?
I say something really quickly?
If you can say it quickly, Judge, you have-
At the end of the last meeting, when we had that drill, I actually was in the middle of asking a question. At that time, city people were at the meeting, and
Yeah.
my very question that I was asking when we had
Oh,
to
thank you.
vacate the premises was input from the city of Olympia. That's what we were discussing.
Oh, good. So you got your
Exact-
answer then.
That's right.
Good,
I just
okay.
wanted to remind you of that.
Thank you.
That's what, there was a lot of commotion that was happening when we
Right, got it.
disbanded from our meeting last time, but I was asking that very question about input from the city of Olympia, whose representatives were present,
Mm-hmm.
because I think many of us recognized how critical it was for the commissioners to have input from the city to make the
Got it.
decision. So my apologies.
That's
for the-
fine. It's been answered. I forgot all about that, of course,
explains
got the
a lot right
commotion.
there, that you guys were.
Yeah.
We had a bomb
That
scare.
gap and then the holidays.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Menzer, you got questions? Let it rip, because we only have a few minutes left.
I'll defer, Jeff covered my burning question, so I don't have a burning question.
You have a burning question, Yuri?
Well, I kind of tend to agree with the mayor. I don't want to be rushing into this $300 million decision. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be ready on Tuesday. I'm just going to make that perfectly clear to everybody, that there's a lot of debate yet to be had. We have not had any discussion between these three commissioners here about this topic at all. So we've got a new person on board. I think that person is going to be very influential and should have all the knowledge that we have. I don't know where Commissioner Menzer is on up to speed or what. I'm not sure that I'm ready to make that decision on Tuesday. I'll just say that right now. I'm not going to jump into the fire if I don't, into the water, I don't know the temperature.
I mean, even just an additional week, I mean, just give.
Okay.
I understand your concern. It's a valid concern.
Well then,
I want everybody on board.
I have a couple questions. Do you need to jump in?
If you want to ask questions of Ron, that's fine. I had another process question.
Okay.
Do that whenever.
was of Ron and even City of Olympia. Of Ron is, you mentioned the single point of security at one of the locations.
Yeah.
And is there a single point of security at each location of the options or
So
not? And
most,
And
yeah.
can you quantify how much that saves, time
Yeah,
or money-wise?
most of the sites have a single point of security. A1 was an example where we have the courthouse on the site to the west of us, and then the admin here. That wouldn't have single point of security. Single point of security helps provide a level of security that we currently do not have, and we have people that want to enter multiple buildings from multiple directions. In the proper layout, that would not be allowed. And if we properly locate the parking relative to the buildings, people aren't tempted to want to enter from different directions of the building. And as society evolves over the past several decades, most of the new facilities that we're designing are designed to have single point of security, including the administrative functions. It used to be that we might separate courthouse from somebody just simply accessing the treasurer, auditor, assessor. That's not the case going forward.
Okay, and my second question is, you mentioned, is it the village going in behind 8th and Plum?
The Plum Street Village, it's tiny houses.
Temporary tiny
Right.
homes that you can
Yeah.
And it's not, it's in, you mentioned it, but I didn't see it documented in here.
It happened since we did the
I figured it was
since we did
timing issue.
the drawings, and the point is
Well, the point is,
it's
I would-
fine for a couple of years or something like. By the
Right.
time we start construction, we need all of the
But
site.
this is the process piece that I had, and that is, I would like to have some, if that location is chosen, to have some type of assurance in place how that will be mitigated, how that process will be taken care of.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the other kind of elephant in the room is the old municipal building, the Creighton Justice Center as well. And that some people have fond memories of that building and in a historic perspective as well. So we have to manage that, keeping
Oh,
the
yeah.
issue
Come on,
regardless.
Rick.
Sorry. Yeah, worrying about the tear down of the circular building from the 60s.
Yeah,
Some
right.
people feel very strongly that's a.
There used to be a pond in the center.
Yes, of
But my
course.
concern is, wow, that village, or whatever, is going to be a successful thing, and then all of a sudden the county's coming in, and you have to get kicked out.
It's not a Quixote Village style
Okay.
setup. This is a temporary transitional housing thing, program that can be moved anywhere.
Okay, good, thank you. John, you had a process question.
Yeah, so, when we kind of started in on this process, I think everybody at the table was asked to really keep an open mind on the site selection piece. And so I've been really intentional on that. But, and then, of course, the county manager started off this meeting by reminding us that the idea is to try to have unified commitment to the site selection once it's made. What I haven't heard yet is, how would you like to get the input from myself, my colleagues, the other stakeholders in this to know where we finally have landed after digesting all this information we've got over the last 2 meetings? How would we present that to you in a way that you can actually consider that? Because I will tell you, I can't support a decision that I don't have any influence over, or at least don't have any input over. And I haven't heard that input part. So that's my process question.
Okay.
So let me address first of all why the meeting I scheduled for next Tuesday, and they seems to appear to be rushed, but we have been working on the schedule, and all of us in this room, we have been working during 2018. And the original schedule, as you may recall, for the Board of County Commissioners to make a decision on the site in early December. This report was available to all of you on December 6th, when the draft was submitted. And the attempt was to December 13th. So the scheduling of this January 15th, it was an attempt to be cognizant of the schedule. So I hope that it doesn't come as a surprise or feel rushed, because we have been working on that schedule for quite some time.
Commissioner?
That's a good question, though, because I do want to have input from electeds and such. I'd like to have that.
Yeah. And that is part of the conversation, whether it's you would like to delay the conversation.
Email's quick.
or maybe have a commitment from the elected officials to provide a perspective by next Tuesday.
And for the record, I don't feel rushed at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ron.
At the end of a 5-month process, on a large team that was working with us, we purposely included public outreach experts, and it's their recommendation back through us to Romero and you that the decision be made sooner rather than later, because the process has really only begun. Once you make a decision on which site, how much money, and then what the language of the levied lid lift is, only at that time can we then start reaching out to the public. I don't care if it's online, if it's in one-on-one meetings, evenings, weekends, whatever it is. It seems like there's a lot of months between now and the vote. There's not. And there's other things happening on the national stage, the statewide stage. There's going to be competing issues and agendas. And so this is hugely important to our county. It's a big number. No matter which selection, we need all the time we can get. So the pressure, a lot of it comes from us back to you. Make this decision so that we can go out on the same sheet of music and, you know, inform voters of what this is all about. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Did you have something? Anybody else? Go ahead.
I just had a quick process question related to the timing. When do you have to provide notice to the auditor in order to have a ballot on the August?
May.
Go ahead, Gary.
On C1, Ron,
Yeah.
you say 30-year design window on your positives.
Yes.
Did you mean 30 years there? Or I thought we were shooting for 50 or
So
100
the-
years.
the
Are you thinking
pro-
of an expansion after 30 years?
Exactly. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
And so the program is written for 30 years out, and then we allow for expansion beyond the 30-year
Okay.
window. Yes.
On the Plum Street site, there's going to be some coordination and almost like County City, at least for the courts.
Yes,
On
yes.
any of the other sites, is that partnership played in at all?
Good question. No. Not that it couldn't be.
Okay.
It's a layer of complication that's not necessary when studying the other two sites. It's a must when we study Plum. And the idea that there be joint county-city uses is a very smart thing. So if one of the other sites is chosen other than Plum, one of the early questions should be circling back to the city, say, do you want to partner? Because they need new facilities that replace Creighton Justice Center. Whether it's on their priority list, I don't know, but the question should be asked.
Okay.
So we have run over. I think it's great you're going to make yourself available to Olympia City Council. That's brilliant. If you can squeeze them into the agenda. And again, Mayor and anybody else is welcome, Keith, on Tuesday for input. And I will make myself available to you should I be able to over the next several days as well. Yes.
In terms of following to John's request, I guess I will ask what will be the forum that you perceive or you will hope to provide feedback to the commissioners. Would you like to draft a letter or?
Well, the question was
And
open.
I agree with you.
I
Right.
really wanted to know what's the best way for us to do that in the timeline that you're in. I'm not trying to slow it down. I'm just asking for the chance.
No, and that's what I'm asking. I think what will you feel in the position, or at least to all the elected officials, in the position to submit a letter or an email or whatever means you feel necessary to provide your perspective, and we'll bring that perspective for Tuesday. Is that enough time?
It is for me. I'm not going to speak for everybody else.
Your premise is beautiful, though.
I'm willing to.
How can you support it if you haven't
together
had
whatever
weigh
I
in?
need to
Right.
do on whatever timeline.
I would suggest as well, Romero, having something written could be codified, and it's consistent with all of our working back and forth with each of these departments. There's a high degree of confidence that we have listened to them for the better part of 3 years, what their program needs are, and they got a chance to give us feedback again and again. So if they could also have an equal amount of input, now that they have all the objective information, share their subjective comments on the sites for each one of them, the pros and the cons. And it would be terrific if we had that from every one of the departments that are included in this study.
Right.
Or all electeds as well. Judge, you get to wrap it up. You get the final say.
That's okay. I just
Final
want
word.
to appreciate that opportunity. It was not clear to me before, even though I've been quite vocal about wanting to get that opportunity. So thank you. I assume that all of the elected officials will hear about that opportunity and be given a deadline. It's unfortunate because I would have liked to have presented in front of the three commissioners. I think they're somewhat more effective in doing that, but any opportunity is appreciated. And I just am wanting to state the obvious. It appears that following this very critical information and all of this research and compilation of data and information, financial information, there will be no opportunity for public input before the commissioners decide this decision.
I've been receiving a fair amount of public feedback, so I'm not worried about that.
Actually, this was something that we added to our scope of work, was how much public input could we solicit in only what amounted to about 3 months worth of time. So we did the very best we could, reaching all segments of the county, a lot of effort to the south. And so I feel strongly that we did what we could in the time frame allowed, but now the decision needs to be made. And once that decision is, then a much more robust public outreach process needs to be occurred so that we can tell people, here is what the need is. Here is why the site was selected, the dollar amount. That's where the real public outreach needs to occur.
Wasn't there 16 meetings with everything but the cost estimate?
Actually,
all the different site options and
correct, and the later ones did have some costs reflected, but you're correct. Yeah, the information built over the course of those 16 options.
One on the west side in December.
You're correct. You're correct.
No.
Just a month ago. Just a month ago.
And another commissioner mentioned was not on the December 13 briefing, but on the December 13 briefing, it was a well, explanation as to the public outreach. So I'm sorry we didn't cover that, but we can follow up with you as to what the details of public outreach was. So today we didn't cover in detail, but it was a very robust report on December 13 as to the public outreach.
Right, my comment was not
Microphone.
about coming up with this. It was,
Come on, Rick.
It was about
Microphone.
the commissioner's decision.
Thank you.
After that was compiled. I understand the public outreach. I was very well about.
Our staff worked overtime putting that together.
And maybe, for your consideration, commissioners, maybe the agenda for next Tuesday, now that I'm thinking a little bit out loud in here, maybe allow the first 30 minutes of your meeting to have all the elected officials come and either provide a written comment, or maybe just a verbal comment, including the city, obviously. And maybe I can structure that agenda that way, the first 30 minutes to hear everybody's perspectives, and then you go into your discussion. And it's not intended, I just scheduled the agenda, but obviously the commissioners need to make a decision whether they want to make a decision that day or not. It is up to your purview, there or later, whatever that is. And again, it's just the intent is to follow up the schedule as we have been working for the last year.
Thank you all very, go ahead, Ty.
Just can we, I'm seeing on my calendar it's like 90 minutes. Can we make it longer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how about if I have 2 hours and then?
Well, I'd suggest that they get an hour, not just 30 minutes. I'd rather have them have an hour to say something.
Until they're done.
Well, I'm going to take an hour, so.
Pam, I'm sorry I didn't get to you or anybody else in the audience or the gallery, but we'll make ourselves available. Staff will as well to answer questions still. But thank you all very much for coming and great input, seriously good input before decisions are made. So thank you and have a great day and weekend.